Welcome back to Good Day Atlanta. It's 9/11 now, commemorating the contributions of trailblazers who created their own Black Basketball League and paved the way for NBA's integration. It was a time known as the Black Fives era. We have Claude Johnson, president and director of Black Fives Foundation, and we have his son Carnegie here with us this morning to tell us a little bit more about it. So both of you, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
morning. Glad to have you here with us. Let's talk more about this Black Fives era, you know, when this was and the importance of this.
Well, this was a period before the NBA when there were African-American basketball teams that were created and that emerged from a period known as the Black Fives era, which was from about 1904 to 1950. And so our foundation, we research and preserve and promote and teach that history for the life lessons that are available.
Yeah, it's so cool, and it's so neat when you're able to make it visual, like by bringing, you know, artifacts like this. So walk us through what you brought for us today. You actually had a chance to show these off yesterday, right?
I did, yeah, thank you. So we have an archives, and they're actually housed here in Atlanta, and some of the items are about 400 historically important items, and so we have a pair of vintage basketball shoes that come from about 1905.
Wow.
And then we have a vintage basketball that's laced, as they were in the old days, and talk about that, and then a pair of knee pads. And these were essential items that were part of any gym bag for a basketball player that was well dressed and well equipped. Yeah.
Before the show, you were telling us a story about this basketball, and I thought that was pretty cool. So tell us what was so interesting about this.
Well, what's cool about this is if you look at it very carefully, Alyse, there's no needle hole. And that's because back then they didn't have that kind of equipment and technology. So before a game, the ball had to be unlaced. Then there's a rubber bladder inside with a little hose, and you have to blow it in order to inflate. Yeah. Fold that hose back over, relace it, pressure test it.
That's a lot of work.
And if it's not quite right, you have to do what? Start over.
You start over.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, that's how it was. There was an art to it, and obviously this gets in the way a little bit, so the dribbling was sometimes irregular, so you have to really be careful about that. But it's just one of the interesting stories of how it wasn't so easy as it is necessarily today, even just to play the game. Yeah,
definitely a challenge there. And I think this is pretty cool. Your son, Carnegie, is a junior reporter for this. So tell me what your role is and how you're able to do that.
Okay, well, I interview prominent people in sports, and I ask them questions, but one specific question being, at what point in your career did your skills improve the most? And then my dad and I sit down and we have a little conversation about it, and then I ask him if there's anything that connects back to the Black Fives era about the player or anything about what he does.
That's a pretty interesting role for you. It really is, and I bet a lot of times there is a connection there, right?
Yeah, I mean, he usually talks about players that remind him of the specific player, whether like it's about LeBron James or like Chris Paul. Usually there's another player in the Black Fives era that connects back.
So he's like a bridge to that new generation. So we're talking to Chris Paul, and then he says, who does Chris Paul remind you of? And I said, oh, that reminds me of this guy, Hudson Oliver, who's a Hall of Fame candidate, and he was a 4-time world champion in the early 1910s.
Connecting the dots there for him, which, you know, I'm sure there's an opening in our sports department. We might talk to you about that just a little bit later. I think you'd probably be good at that. I'm just kidding.
Give him your card later, right?
We'll do that. And speaking of connections and connecting the dots here, Atlanta actually played a really big role in this at the time.
That's right, that's right. So Atlanta had its historically black colleges and universities, and one of them was Morehouse College. And Morehouse was one of the first African-American basketball teams around the 1910s, early 1910s, and they started a 42-game win streak, which was broken when they went to New York City to play a team called the St. Christopher Club that featured a young Paul Robeson. And when that streak was broken, unfortunately, they never came back to New York, but it opened up this new channel of exposure in the South, which then led to national exposure for the game among African Americans. So there was a big role there, and then there were also a couple of big stars that are connected to Atlanta. One of them was William Pop Gates, who's a Hall of Famer. He played for the Tri-Cities Blackhawks in the National Basketball League, and he also attended Clark.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So some great history there.
And then you also can't forget about Hank Dezzoni. Most people know about the first 3 African-American players in the NBA, but there was a 4th, and that's Hank Dezzoni, who also attended Clark University and also played for the St. Louis Hawks. He stayed in the league for 5 games, and then he quit out of frustration with the hardships of racism.
Yeah, just what was happening at the time. It's interesting
Yeah.
that when you hear about all of those roads leading back here, and there's actually an event tonight at the Hawks game. What's going on?
Yeah, well, they're going to have a halftime. First of all, there's exhibits and expertise and historians and artifacts all throughout the arena. But also, at halftime, there's going to be a special event where they're taking some content and doing a reenactment. And they just said, you know, pay attention, be careful, don't leave, watch, because it's very exciting.
Okay,
The
so we've
team
been
has been
warned.
great.
We've
Yeah,
been
exactly.
warned. We're definitely going to be watching that. Both of you, thank you so much for coming today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate
Thank you
this.
very much.
Yeah, and I think we'll mention something about your podcast, because he also has a podcast. We'll put that on our website.
It's called Carnegie Chats.
Carnegie Chats. There you go. Check it out. Apparently, it's really, really good, which I'm not surprised to hear. So Carnegie and Claude, thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much.
Definitely appreciate it. If you want more information on tonight's Hawks game or on Black Fives Foundation, just click on the viewer information story on the Fox 5 Atlanta app.